Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Tuesday, November 12th meeting of the Wilmington Board of Selectmen. All members are present. We have just adjourned an executive session for the purpose of considering a purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property at 64 Wildwood Street, and also for the approval of minutes from October 28th, 2019. Could you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have transmitting of Treasury warrants 18, 18A, 19, and 19A. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion's made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's made and second. All in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. And we don't have any minutes to approve at this meeting, so we'll move into appointments. You'll note that our agenda calls for a 7 o'clock appointment with the introduction of our two newest police officers. Unfortunately, due to an untimely death of one of the officers in the officer's family, we are going to postpone at their request of the chief. I think that's an appropriate request. And although we welcome them to our community as our two new officers, we understand that their family comes first, so we understand they can't be here tonight. We look forward to welcoming them at a future date. And please join me in offering our condolences for her loss. Officer Souza lost a loved one, so we send our condolences to her and her family. And obviously, we welcome them to our community, so please join me if you see the two new officers in our community. Before we welcome them here formally at a meeting, please welcome Officer Souza and Officer Fitzgerald to our community when you see them on the streets. Second appointment, also found out today, and our town manager, Mr. Hull, can explain a little bit more, but this one is also postponed. Mr. Hull.
So the plan was to have a discussion about the prospect of a platform to be constructed at the North Wilmington commuter rail. There's been ongoing discussions involving Selectman Kyra, myself, our representative, legislative delegation, Senator Tarr, Representatives Robertson and Gordon, and representatives from the MBTA. There was a conference call a couple of weeks ago that put forward at least a very preliminary plan for a smaller platform, and that was going to be the topic of conversation this evening. It was scheduled for this evening, and then I received word today from a spokesperson from Senator Tarr's office that the MBTA representatives were not able to make it this evening, and with the expectation that there would be particular questions directed to them, the decision was made to postpone that meeting as well. So at this point, we're looking at possibly the meeting in December or perhaps a meeting in January.
Okay, if you could just keep us apprised of that future date, we'll certainly let the public know. So given the unusual circumstances that our first two appointments have been postponed, we are going to, if it's okay with you folks up here, I'm going to take the agenda a little bit out of order. And so to comply with the open meeting law, we're going to just pause for a little bit on the 7:30 appointment, just in case some more folks want to come down and hear the conversation. I know that this has been posted now since Thursday. I see there's some residents in the audience. Perhaps we'll be joined by some more for our 7:30 appointment, so I want to make sure we don't cut anybody short. So if it's okay and there aren't any objections, we'll take up communications first before we move into our 7:30 appointment. It's now 7:05. I want to give residents an opportunity to arrive and make sure everybody tuning in at home will be able to see the conversation. Are there any objections? Seeing none, Mr. Hall, if we could take up communications, please.
Yes, so the first item under communications is a memo from me to the board about reserved parking spaces at the MBTA commuter rail. This was an issue that Selectman McCoy brought to my attention. There was a recent ribbon cutting at one of the businesses across the street on Main Street. And he noted that when he took a look at the area, that there were a number of spaces that were vehicles parked there, and he noticed before and after the event, which took place for a period of time, that the vehicles remained there, and speculated that those individuals may be using the commuter rail to get into Boston, and that the spaces, there were spaces designated as spaces for the merchants across the street. Went back and into the files, and we did identify a letter from March 12th of 1999. This was from the MBTA to then Representative James Maselli, noting that, at least in part, as mitigation measures, the MBTA has decided to offer the town a total of 20 spaces in the new parking lot. The spaces will be designated for the town of Wilmington as short-term parking, business use only. It turns out that it appears that there may be just 16 spaces that are designated. There's actually some signage that needs to be replaced, so I've asked our Public Works Director to contact the MBTA about replacing the parking signs. The bigger challenge, quite frankly, is going to be monitoring the spaces there, because there is no there are no meters, so we're really reliant to some measure on the police department checking in periodically, and or checking perhaps earlier in the morning as commuters are coming in, and advising those who may be parking there that it's not intended for commuter parking.
Mr. Chairman, could I make a comment
Please,
before you go?
Mr. McCoy.
Yeah, I just want to let you know, we don't usually get our package until Friday, so I didn't really read it till Sunday. And I see here that it says that, you know, Mike Woods, who's I think's a great department head, he tried to reach out to Keola's Commuter Service to replace the sign, and he hasn't heard a response since then. Well, because the holiday was Monday, I immediately this morning, as an MBT advisory board member, I got on the phone this morning, I called Paul Regan. I explained the situation to him, and I said, I remember back in 1999, it was addressed to my uncle, Rep. Maselli, that there was supposed to be 20 parking spaces, and the town manager mentioned about a ribbon ceremony across the street. And then I illegally parked, to tell you the truth. And I went out there for a half hour, and I counted 16 spots, and 2 for the, it looks like the taxi cab driver put a little sign of his own there to show the 2 spots. So I talked to Mr. Regan, I explained the situation, and he says, Mike, I believe you. He says, I believe there's 20 spots, and he said that he will make sure that the signage gets put up and it gets done. He said, I can't do it immediately, but I'm promised I'll try to get it before any major snowstorm. So he gave me his word that he was gonna put up the signs. And mutual respect to the town manager, I said, do you think you could give the town manager a call to tell him exactly what you're doing? Because I wanna work with you, Jeff, and I'd love to be in that meeting too. You know, he said he would reach out and talk to you, but he reassured me that he'd take care of it, get the signs put out there. And I said, seriously, people illegally parking, have the cops, you know, tow them out, you know, unfortunately, because that was given to the businesses in that area. And so he said he would do that. So, you know, anytime there's a problem, give me a call, and I'll pick up the phone, call him immediately, and that's what I did. So I'm glad to see that some action's gonna get done. And he said, Jeff, he'll reach out to you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No problem. If I could just add, I just am a little concerned about how are we gonna relay this message to folks who show up every day and take the train? I'm not one of them, but if you go in there and park for the short term, right, before the signage can go up, I wouldn't imagine no one's gonna get towed from now until the sign go up, right? I mean, if you're used to going there every single day and parking in one of those spots without a problem, it's gonna be
Right,
really
I
a
think
shock to you when you come back and.
I don't think we want to take the approach of towing people immediately, to the extent that, again, officers are able to speak with individuals who may be parking in there on the premise that they can park and go into Boston. You know, we certainly want to try to approach it in a more measured way. Again, the challenge obviously is, you know, the police are out in various areas of town, and to spend several hours waiting for potentially commuters to show up and park there is not higher up on the priority scale, but, you know, I have talked to the police chief, and we will make efforts to try to deal with that.
Okay, yeah, so until that time, when the signage
Oh, yeah.
gets updated, I'm glad to hear that nobody will be towed, but
Yeah.
we're gonna do our best to get the message out to folks.
Right.
There's gonna be a little bit of a change.
Maybe I missed some, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Eaton.
Mr. Reed?
It's just for some context, because I do park in that lot as part of my regular commute. The way that folks pay for parking now is through an app on their phone. And and it's happened to me, I haven't been as lucky as Mr. McCoy in not getting dinged for parking illegally, but what I've forgotten to actually pay for my parking for the day, what happens is, I'm assuming somebody drives around the lot and looks for the cars that have not paid to park, and we get a ticket in the mail. So at this point, just educated guess from somebody who has some experience parking illegally there, is that I don't think anything would happen. I don't imagine anything would happen until the signage changes, because I'd imagine they're really only, if somebody is parked in a temporary taxi spot and it's clearly not a taxi and nobody's in it, I'd imagine that person would get a ticket as is. I'd imagine that would continue. But I don't think that they are in the practice of regularly towing folks. But
Thank you. So,
Excuse me, I had to use that a lot of times. You're talking about where the Wilmington, where the train goes?
Yes.
we,
Is that what
yes.
you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
I've had to use that, my name's John O'Connell. I've had to use that a lot, a number of times. What you have to do is, they got a number you call, all right, on the board right there, on the T-board right there. You call the number, and you have to put in your credit card, and then while you're there, you also have to remember your plate number. See, the way, how they tag you is by your plate number. If your plate number isn't in the system, that you bought that you paid for that space, that's how they get you. The thing is, at night, if you can't remember your plate number, you're running back and forth. And they also have a time thing. So if you don't get it done, you gotta start all over again. It's the stupidest system I've ever seen. So if they only had something, you put your credit card in, you get a ticket, you stick it in your window, you're fine, like that. And then, and it's still in the system, but they don't do it that way. So that's probably why you got nailed.
I
I
got
got-
nailed today to pay for my parking. I deserved every.
Yeah, but I'm just saying is, they look at the license plate.
Yeah.
Now, if you can't remember your license plate right off the bat, it times out. So you gotta do it all over again. Meanwhile, you might miss your train. So, that's one of the problems I have. So I don't know if anyone else has. But, you know, it's sort of a time-consuming way that people are in that lot, especially, like I said, especially at night, the twilight, you can't see, stuff like that. You're running back to your license plate, and by the time you get back, you're done.
Thank you, Mr. O'Connell. Any other commentary up here? The biggest thing I'm taking away is that now's the time, if you've parked illegally and you want to admit to it, we already have 2 people that have already done that. Does anybody else want to admit to?
No, but now that I know how hard it is to do all that, I'm not gonna be taking the train into Boston anymore.
All right, so Mr.
I
Hall,
won't charge you for that.
thank you. Thank you.
Next is.
Make sure we bill Mr. Eaton for that. Make sure he's paid up.
So next is a memo from me to the board with regard to the Textron courts and ball fields. As you recall, there was discussion at the last meeting about the license agreement that is in a draft form at this point. We have been interested clearly in accessing the baseball fields and the courts for town use, to make it available for town residents. The response from Textron has been that they would allow us to enter into a license as opposed to a lease with them, but the groups that would be eligible to use the courts in the fields would be Town of Wilmington sports leagues and other town-organized recreation activities, is the way the language is currently written. So it's intended to be groups within under the umbrella of the town government of Wilmington. The other issue, which is probably more of an issue is the expectation, the condition of the field. So as everybody knows, if you've driven by there, it's pretty scraggly looking, hasn't been mowed or taken care of, attended to recently. DPW representatives went out there within the last couple of weeks. There were some pictures that I provided to the board, and also obtained some information about the costs associated with dealing with the situation there. So in order to deal with the overgrowth and semi-weeds and, I don't know, trees, whatever is growing in there, the Public Works Director has indicated that there would be a piece of equipment that would, some kind of a more industrial strength mower, as I understand it, that would cost approximately $500 to rent to cut it. And then once that initial pass is done, so to speak, there could be the DPW Parks and Grounds Division could continue to mow it thereafter. The bigger issues are dealing with the ball fields in terms of restoring them. They're in very difficult straits. The base paths are all overgrown. So in order to really rebuild them to a place where they could be usable in a safe manner, the estimated cost is $150,000 per field, and there's 2 fields there. Also, the courts, the tennis courts are cracked. There would need to be, those areas would need to be cleaned out and crack sealed. That's a practice that we do with some of our courts, although clearly our courts aren't in the condition these are in. That cost would be estimated to be about $35,000 to do the crack sealing and prepping for the crack sealing. And then we have a company that we use for ongoing maintenance of all of our parks and fields. And the cost there would be approximately $15,000 on an annual basis. So, you know, that's, it's one thing to cut the fields and make them more appealing, I suppose, but to put that kind of money into private property, which we have no right to, we wouldn't own it, we wouldn't have a lease to it, we're simply being permitted to use it, I think is certainly not something I would recommend. And the other, as I'd mentioned previously, the last time that Karen Campbell, I talked to her, there wasn't any particular programs that the Recreation Department had a use for that property for, and it's my understanding that in conversation with Ed Harrison that the athletic programs at the high school, there was not any, he didn't have any use for the property there either. So, you know, it becomes a question of who is going to use it, I guess, if we, and I would say even if there was a group that was going to use the property, again, to spend anything more than a few $1,000s on private property, which they could give us notice at any time that they're looking to, for us to leave. We would have 90 days to be off the property or cease using the property, I would think would be ill-advised.
Yeah, I would just say, my opinion is that on this particular matter, given this information that we've been provided, that I can't see us spending town money on something that nobody wants. I think it's unfortunate nobody's interested in the using the property. So again, I can't see spending town money on it if nobody wants it, when there are so many things that the people actually want that we could be spending money on. So I think that's my 2 cents based on the information we've been provided, but I think it's unfortunate.
Next is a memo from me to the board with regard to the fiscal '21 budget development. So the first phase of that process is issuance of budget guidelines to department heads with respect to our capital improvement budget. This is, capital improvements are defined as projects that cost $20,000 or more and have a so-called useful life of at least 3 years or more. Typically, they're building improvements, infrastructure improvements, could be purchase of vehicles or would be purchase of vehicles, so things of that scale. So those instructions went out in early October, and the deadline for those submissions was beginning in November here, November 4th. And then just this past week ago, in meeting with the department heads, they were provided with the guidelines for development of the operating budget, and the that is everything from all the services and programs that are provided to personnel costs. So the deadline for department heads to return their operating budgets is December 2nd. And then it's my expectation to present the budget to the Board of Selectmen at your meeting on January 27th. And so in the memo, I just indicated that if board members have particular areas or priorities that you would like me to take a look at, it would be helpful for me to know about that by the 16th of December, by or before the 16th, which is the next, 2 meetings out, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Next is a memo from John O'Neill, who is our IT director, and he's approached me last spring about the prospect of pursuing a grant with regard to cybersecurity. It's actually called Cybersecurity Awareness Grant Program. And obviously, being in the business that he's in, being responsible for all the town general government computers and security of the computers, he is constantly concerned about the malware and ransomware that is out there. And so through his efforts, he was successful in obtaining this competitive grant through the state. And it's actually, as it turned out at the time, the school department was in the search process for their own IT director, who has since been hired, Ken Lord. But the expectation is that this will be a collaborative effort between the town general government and the schools to take advantage of this grant. It's basically intended to provide education to end users about how to use the technology in a way to try to minimize the risks of infecting our computers with ransomware and malware. And in fact, there have been a number of communities across the state who have really been crippled by these kind of things. The town of Charlton, for example, was one community that was very much impacted. One of our neighboring towns has also been impacted, but the risks, not to over-dramatize this, is that everything from paying bills to issuing payrolls could literally be put on indefinite hold. So I think it's great that John was able to pursue that, and we're looking forward to having that training rolled out.
Certainly our thanks to John for pursuing this and putting in the time and effort to get this grant. So congratulations to him. This is a real great thing for the town. So thank you to John and Ken for what they'll do for us. I'm noting the clock is it's the 25 past, so we probably have time for one more before we move into the 7:30 appointment.
Sure.
If that's okay?
The next correspondence, and the next two are actually address the same issue, and that is, this correspondence is from Mary Jane Handy, Director of Accounts, Department of Revenue, with regard to our notification of free cash. I would also just note that the subsequent memo is from Brian Perry, our Finance Director / accountant, just offering his comments about the free cash. So every year, as of the end of the fiscal year, 6/30, the free cash is closed out to zero essentially. So the free cash, in rough definition, is the amount of funds that the town has available, and then discounting it for any obligations, minus the costs against the costs that the town incurs, whether it's payroll, capital projects, any number of projects that we have that we owe money for. So as of the end of the fiscal year, that number closes out to zero. Then the accountant's office, in conjunction with the treasurer collector's office, tie out the books, submit that information to the Department of Revenue, and then we get a new free cash number. So our current number as of 7/1/2019 is $24 million, $24,972,000. So it's a slight increase over the fiscal, the calendar, I'm sorry, the July 1, 2018 number, which was $23,608,625.
23 million.
I'm sorry, $23,608,625, right, so it has gone up. I know this is it's a two-edged sword. On the one hand, the town, with the free cash, has the opportunity to put funds into some of the long-term investments that we've talked about here recently. And I would anticipate that that would be the plan going forward.
Mr. Chairman, could I just ask you a question?
Please.
Jeff, I'm just a little confused. Last year, didn't we have 32 million in free cash, and now we only have 24 million? Unless,
No, so the free cash last year was 23.6. Then we took $4 million, we transferred $4 million into the capital stabilization account, which is another reserve account that is specifically for, purchase of vehicles and other capital-related items, building repairs and so on. So between that, and then we spent $566,000 to take the underground fuel tanks out over at the highway garage and put above-ground tanks in, and then $185,000 was taken from free cash to replace the boiler at the library. So when all was said and done at the end of last year's town meeting, the number was drawn down from 23.6 down to about 18,857,625. So it was drawn down by $4.7 million or thereabouts. So it's replenished itself and is slightly higher than last year.
the capital stabilization account, is that also included in the 24 million?
No.
We have free, so that's separate of that.
Right,
All right,
so,
how much money do we have in the capitalization account? Capitalization, yeah.
capital
Stabilization.
is, believe, about 14 million.
All right, so we have 14 million in that account, and we also have, what, 24 million in another account?
Yes, well, the 14 million is capital.
I get
The
that.
24 is essentially the excess of revenue that we receive over the costs and obligations that we have.
No, I understand that. So we basically have two accounts, 14 million in the capital stabilization account, and we had 24 million in the other general fund, say. So we have, in essence, about $38 million available to the community, correct?
Yes.
All right, so we had 32 million last year, so I know we taxed everybody at the maximum, and we were able to put $6 million in the bank above and beyond that. That's what it looks like.
Oh, we didn't tax everybody to the maximum, we shifted it away.
Well, no, I know we shifted, we do the tax shift, and we always place the more burden on the commercial, which I've done religiously, so we've done that to give the residents the best bang for their buck. But but I'm trying to, call this a ball or a strike here, but we do have $38 million that is available to the community then, in both
Yes.
accounts.
That's right. Between the two
Okay.
accounts is roughly $38 million.
Okay.
The capital stabilization, in order to appropriate money from that, it requires a 2/3 vote by town meeting. In order to appropriate money from free cash, it requires a majority vote.
Okay, no, I'm just wanting to make that clear. I just don't want folks to think we just had 24 million. I'm sure people are gonna say, I thought you said we had 32 million last year, McCoy. Well, between both accounts, we have 38 million in the account. So I just want to be clear on that. There's two separate bank accounts, and it's just the total. Thank you.
And Jeff, could you remind us, S&P recommends that we have how much in savings?
Well, so S&P encourages communities to have 15% of your operating budget in reserves, in free cash. So, we're clearly at that, and quite frankly, at this point, above that. As I don't want to repeat the mantra, but the fact of the matter is we have significant costs associated with pensions that we're having to deal with, and we have at least $143 million, probably more at this point, in building projects. So is $38 million a lot of money? There's no question it's a lot of money, but that needs to be considered in context. We're going to have to spend some of that money at some point in time to do some building repairs or building replacements. And when the economy tails off, as it will, as it has for the last 100 years, and motor vehicle excise revenue tapers off, state aid falls away, we're going to rely on some of that money. So is it a lot of money? It is. I tend to think of it as the fact that we have been judicious about how we have spent our money. And we're not looking to stick it to people. We're trying to save for the rainy day and save for some of these big projects.
Okay, thank you. I'm seeing that it's just past 7:30. If we could pick this up after our third appointment. I thank the residents for their patience. Some of you, I think, are here for this conversation. I saw some other folks joined us, so welcome. We're going to pick up for our 7:30 appointment and welcome up to the table Town Engineer Paul Looney, Director of Planning Valerie Gingrich, and also want to recognize Jamie's here from the DPW as well. So, good evening and welcome. Thank you for being here.
Mr. Chairman, some of the slides, the font might be a little small. I have packets for the
Thank you.
board.
Thank you.
I have these slides available in PDFs too, and a few extras too, if anyone.
Thank you, Paul. Whenever you're ready, I know you're just getting situated, but the floor is yours. Thank you. You're obviously here to have a discussion with us about unaccepted ways
That's correct.
in town, and I know we're all eager to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Paul Looney, Town Engineer, here with Valerie Gingrich, Director of Planning, and Jamie McGaldy, Operations Director, to have round two of discussion on unaccepted ways with the Board of Selectmen. If you recall, we met in the springtime, I believe, where we identified the problem in that the current program is too cost prohibitive, and for residents that live on these unaccepted ways, and year after year, we're stuck with the same problem, this vast number of unaccepted ways in town. We were tasked at that point by the board to come up with a solution. We're going to present a cost-sharing approach tonight that we think is fair. It certainly is more affordable to residents that live on these unaccepted ways to go through the process. Not to leave you in suspense, but before I get into the details of that program, I just want to briefly recap some of the major talking points of our last discussion. It should only take 5 minutes or so.
Please.
Some of the first slides here. So first, what is the problem? The problem is the town is limited in its ability to expend public funds for improving private ways, right? Another way to put it would be a street needs to be accepted to, for the town to improve the ways. So what is the street acceptance process? It's a statutory process. It's defined by Mass General Law. It's vetted through the Board of Selectmen, and there are no broad strokes approach, which is what makes this such a challenging problem. So each roadway in town that's unaccepted would have to go through this same process. It starts with the preparation of a survey plan. A survey plan identifies who has the rights in that way to legally convey their interest to the town. It also lets the town see what exactly is being conveyed to them. And it looks at encroachments in that way. Are there sheds, retaining walls, stairs, gardens, you name it. We've kind of seen it in the public way. So, I'm sorry, in the private way. The survey plan is brought to the Board of Selectmen where the process is initiated. The Board of Selectmen then vote to refer the matter to the Planning Board. The Planning Board then creates a report. That report, what they look at is the roadway up to town standards, or what improvements are necessary to bring the roadway up to town standards. Part of this problem that's unique in Wilmington is that we have so many roadways that were constructed before there was any process for subdivision control, which prescribes roadway construction standards. So they're, I'm sure you're all aware, they're in varying conditions, which I'll get into in a couple slides. So from that point, it goes back to the Board of Selectmen for a public hearing where they vote to lay out the way as a public way. Then it goes to town meeting vote. If it's voted in the affirmative at town meeting to accept the way, it doesn't end there, believe it or not. The town then has 120 days to acquire the interest either through easement or fee, so a deed, in the way. And everyone who has an interest in that way needs to convey their right to the town for it to go through. And where we only have 120 days, I can tell you from personal experience, we brought, if you recall, Pomfret Road to street acceptance last year. There were 4 owners. It took, I want to say it was close to 90 days, and that was documents all teed up through it was through private development. So really it just required a signature. It's just tough. People are busy. It's not number one on a lot of some folks' priority list. So hindsight being 20/20, whatever we decide tonight to move forward with, I think what we'll want to do is move that up front so we have the sign-offs from all the residents up front before town meeting vote, and then that'll give us some breathing room to not come down to the wire like it did the last time. So, as I said, it's statewide, the street acceptance process, but what's unique with Wilmington is how many unaccepted ways we have. We have over 550 constructed roadways in town. 245 are considered unaccepted. That's 26.3 miles. They vary from very poor to actually very good condition. We recently performed a street inventory of all of our ways in town, and that includes unaccepted ways. And we broke those unaccepted ways out and had a separate report on just those roadways. This table is kind of high level, and on the slide here I categorized them based on the condition of the roadway. So we have like 22 roadways to consider in good condition. That's kind of a do-nothing improvement. 67 roadways in fair condition that would require some amount of resurfacing, 109 roads in poor condition that would require full reconstruction, and 47 roadways in an unimproved state that would require full construction. So I have a cost estimate here for paving only. This might be a little misleading because there are other costs associated with street acceptance, but let's just look at it. If we were just to pave these roadways based on these conditions, it would be approximately $9.6 million. But what are the other costs to consider for street acceptance? I mentioned the upfront cost with the survey plan. There may also be some minor engineering fees associated with that. If drainage is involved in a widened section, and potentially some attorney's fees that, again, in the grand scheme of things, would be probably relatively minor once you had a template for a deed. I would imagine we could continue to reuse that same document with minor variations, of course. And then there's the physical improvements. So on some of the roadways that weren't built to current town standards, what improvements are necessary to get to that point? Widening, is there a room for a turnaround? Does drainage need to be addressed on that roadway? So I expanded the table and looked at roadways that were less than 20 feet and over 20 feet wide. And started there. I applied a number for survey layout. I contacted some local survey firms and got a number of about $2,000 per 100 foot of roadway. And then looked at construction, overall construction, so addressing things like widening the roadway beyond 20 feet, beyond, if they were less than 20 feet, to 20 feet wide. If there's no drainage on the roadway, how much would it put a number to drainage, and came up with a total cost, soup to nuts, so to speak, $14.25 million. So our current practice, roadways are not accepted until they're improved to town standards. There was a committee formed in 1994 to address this issue. It was the Committee on Unaccepted Ways. 3 years later, in 1997, they issued this report. If you haven't had a chance to just at least read through the upfront executive summary, I would do so. It's where I learned a lot of what I learned about this whole process. But I do want to point out and just read right from it. This is what we follow now, prescribed by this committee. So, as a result of the committee's meetings with the town manager, town council, and town accountant, it was determined that the town is limited in its ability to expend public funds on unaccepted ways. In fact, the only avenue believed to be available for addressing the costs associated with the needed engineering, research, survey, and improvements to allow for acceptance of the ways is the Betterments Program. The Betterments Program is a state program that allows for the expenditure of public funds to the extent of the general benefit to the town provided by the betterment, in this case, the roadway improvements. This report goes on to say that they find that the general benefit to the community would be a 10% buy-in from the town for these ways, but in no way exceed 50%. It would go higher based on whether or not the town had a parcel on that way, so we would have an interest in improving the way. So what I've provided for here is an example. It's a real-life example. It's Carmel Street. They came in 2015 with a petition to have their roadway accepted. We went out, CDTR, Community Development Technical Review, met, came up with a conceptual layout. My division did a cost estimate on the roadway. What we had come up with is improvements. It's in poor condition. The whole thing needs to be reconstructed, and there is no drainage on the roadway. Came up with a cost for construction of $250,000 and survey and soft costs or upfront costs of $25,000 for a total of $275,000. With the town funding 10% of that project, that would be $25,000, leaving the $250,000 to be appropriated amongst all the owners that have interest in the way. There were 9, so that cost was $28,000 per owner. The next day, they rescinded their petition. So it's, that's the issue that we're having. So possible cost-sharing practice. Valerie is going to discuss some of the details on that.
Okay. So we were asked to look at alternatives to our current practice. And what we came up with was something that kind of flips the script on the cost piece. So the idea that residents would invest in those upfront soft costs, so the survey, the engineering, the attorney's fees. The street would then go through the street acceptance process, become a public way, and then the town would actually fund any necessary improvements or construction after it's become a public way. So with that same Carmel Street example, the town portion would be the 90%, the $250,000, but the resident portion would be the $25,000, which would be split among those property owners, coming out to $2,800 per property. So how would this work? So the idea is that there would be kind of an annual budget placeholder for roadway improvements. Again, we would require kind of upfront resident effort to do the soft cost portion, the survey, the permitting, the legal work to be eligible. And we definitely want to require that 100% of the property owners would be on board. We can't, like Paul, explained, we can't complete that acceptance process without 100% of the property owners signing off. So that would be kind of placed up front. So you have 100% buy-in, and you go do your survey and the work that you need to do, and then you become eligible, and you bring your kind of package of things into the Community Development Technical Review Team, which CDTR, which is an existing group of town departments that review all development projects that come in. It would undergo a technical evaluation and come up with a cost for that work. And that group would then kind of program those eligible streets into the 5-year capital plan. So the next step then would be for the streets on that year's program would go to town meeting for a vote on both acceptance and the funding for construction, for improvements. Once the street would be accepted, the improvements could be constructed because the street is now a public way and the town can spend that money. So I'm going to go through an actual example of this, kind of start to finish. So Carmel Street, again, the first thing would be that residents would come in, meet with staff to review the conditions of their roadway, and we could provide guidance on the process, what they would be asked for. The residents then would go make sure that they have unanimous support amongst the property owners. They would do the survey, the engineering, and the permitting. And then they would bring all of that in, the plans and legal documents, with that formal resident support to CDTR for a technical review. And that, we're thinking that would happen probably beginning of September for a timeline. The CDTR would then review those eligible roadways and program the 5-year capital plan with the eligible streets. The list of that year's streets would go to the Board of Selectmen to start the street acceptance process. And then the town meeting vote would be on the acceptance of the street and the construction funding if improvements are necessary. Following the town meeting vote, after the way becomes a public way, the improvements would be constructed by the town. So this approach really solves a couple things. It flips those costs around to put most of the cost burden on the town. It would kind of solve the issue of the town spending money on a private way. So that money would be spent after it becomes an accepted public way. And it also would kind of give a little bit of control to the residents as far as, you know, once they have support amongst their street, they can, you know, move ahead with the process as they almost kind of making some recommendations for what their street looks like, coming in with a proposal for street improvements that goes through the process. And then the other thing is because it's set up that way, it's almost self-prioritizing in a way, because you know, those soft costs and that support takes a little bit of time to kind of get together. So those streets are going to come in once they're ready. They're not all coming in at one time, so it's a kind of a spread out approach that would be manageable for the process. So that's sort of a run through of what we're looking at generally, and we're happy to answer questions and have more of a discussion.
Thank you very much. I know that this is certainly not an easy fix, and I know that you two, and along with the DPW, spent a lot of time looking at this, so we appreciate that. And I know that this is really the first time since the mid-'90s that we've kind of made it this far in terms of trying to find a solution. I said it before at a meeting that I think in my short time on the board, the number one thing I hear from folks is that it's expensive to live here. The second thing is my road is in terrible shape. What can I do? And for the most part, people have been really patient, but in my opinion, at some point we have to do something. And so I really appreciate you guys trying to do this. Again, we'll see how it plays out. Ultimately, town meeting will make a decision. I want to make sure that's very clear for folks, that whatever the board decided to do, the town decided to do, we would have to, you know, the residents would have an opportunity to go before town meeting. And so you have that listed there, second to last line, that whatever was to happen for a resident in a road, town meeting would collectively be the ones to decide. How they arrive there is probably up to us. How we want to pursue this, do we want to pursue this? And so that's why we're here tonight. I know for a fact, well, I grew up right down the street from Carmel Street, but there's so many roads in town that are in dire need. And it's, you know, these people pay taxes every day, like all of us, and it's too bad that their streets are really in that poor condition. The other thing I think about too is we've got a $600,000 fire truck being built at this moment. And eventually that brand-new fire truck that we spent so much money on is gonna have to drive down some of these roads. It'd be a shame if we put a new truck on some of these roads that look like that. So that's just my initial thoughts, and so I wanna make sure we give everybody an opportunity to speak up here. If I had to guess, there's some people in the audience that would like to be heard on this, so I'll be willing to do that as well. But any comments or questions?
I have some questions for sure. So,
Mrs. O'Mahony.
good evening. As I've said before, full disclosure, I live on an unaccepted way. I'm embedded in an unaccepted land. I think there's 5 unaccepted roads that either touch my road or impact my road. So I say that to start with my questions. But my initial question is, when was the last time we allowed an unaccepted road to be built? When's the last time one was created in town? Because I know you said a lot of them were created prior to kind of any regulations by the town, but my concern is that we're still allowing them to be built. So do you know when the last unaccepted road was constructed in Wilmington?
Sure.
Okay. So, I guess a couple things. So when roads are constructed, either through subdivision control, going through the planning board, or through sort of a roadway improvement project, an 81G is what we call it. Those go through the planning board for approval, and they're constructed, at the time that they're constructed, they're private. And the idea is that they're approved in a way that they could be accepted as a public way. The acceptance process is a separate process that we can encourage, but we can't necessarily, I guess, force it. And Pomfret was a good example last year, where they went through the permitting process, they built out the roadway, private road, and we said, you know, this was just constructed, it's been permitted by the board, the planning board, why not get this accepted? But, you know, we had to go out and sort of make that happen, or try to make it happen. Like Paul said, it kind of came down to some signatures, which it did happen, but it's a separate process. So building out the roadway, that's approved by the planning board, but the street acceptance process goes to town meeting, which is a different process.
Right, so
Yeah.
that doesn't, when was the last time there was a road, so is Pomfret now accepted?
Yes.
Was that-
It
okay.
is, yeah.
So when is the last time there was new construction that hasn't been accepted yet? I mean, is there, in 2019, is there roads that are being extended or created that are not accepted roads?
There could be. So the challenge here in Wilmington is that in the early 1900s, most of Wilmington was protracted subdivisions. So it was subdivisions that were laid out and never constructed. So right-of-ways were formed, paper streets, I think they're called, with lots that were sold off one by the original developers. And then when Wilmington started to be more and more developed, those lots were sold off, and prior to subdivision control, roadways were just constructed to give access to those lots, right? And now they remain as private ways. So but the right-of-ways still remain. So technically, if landowners that own those lots and have a right-of-way, even a paper street, they have the right to develop that roadway. It's just now we have standards, construction standards that they have to abide by, and we collect the documents to the street acceptance plan like we did for Pomfret. So we do what we can on a staff level to require that all those documentation, but we can't force them to go through the street acceptance process.
Okay, so that, my follow-up question would be, is the roads at least being constructed now, the engineering and whatnot, would they be up to the standards to be accepted?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
that's exactly what we do. And that's how we're
Okay.
trying to nip this thing in the
So
bud.
is it fair to say that the roads, I'm just going back to the slide that you kind of had your rating, so the good condition roads, is it fair to say those are most likely the newer construction roads?
Yeah, for the most part, like the Pomfret was on that list as like kind of a do-nothing, and they went through recent permitting, so we got all those documents up front. That's how we were able to just bring that forward last year. We didn't expend any funds, any public funds, we just had all those documents teed up, and okay, here we go, and that's, we did the legwork then to coordinate with all those landowners that had, because they were, the roadway was developed by a developer who had one lot building a home, but they were people who had lived on that street for years, right? So we had to coordinate then with each one of those property owners.
Okay, because I think that my other question that you kind of already touched on is the paper road component of it, because, you know, my streets also have paper road extensions that have never been utilized but are shown on maps. And so I speak, again, I'm not speaking, you know, for my own personal interest, but my concern is, you know, we bought our house in December of 2003. It was constructed in 1985. My neighborhood, and at least the two neighborhoods around me, were built in 85 and 87. I had no idea I was buying a property on an unaccepted road when I bought the property. I'm pretty confident the person I bought my house from didn't know that it was an unaccepted road. And I have a real concern with looking at my neighborhood now. I have, you know, we have a really mixed neighborhood. I used to be the youngest family on the street. We're now the ones preparing our kids to go to college. Our neighbors' kids are in college. I have neighbors preparing for retirement. So I have a concern with them having to front any money when our tax rate has been the same as everyone else in the community. And I know that's the standard argument that's being made. You know, I didn't get a break. When I bought my house in 2003, I wasn't getting a reduced tax rate because I was buying a private way that was an unaccepted road. And my concern is $2,800 or $28,000. That's still a burden to be putting on residents to have a road that's considered accepted by the town. And I feel like this is a great start. You know, I appreciate the efforts that are being made to try to address this, because I don't think we can ignore it anymore. But my concern is, I don't see how we're asking residents to pony up the money to do engineering and surveying and attorney's fees to basically fix something that a developer should have done 30 years ago. You know, my developer is probably is retired in Florida if he's still, you know, alive, and we're now gonna have to pay for something that should have been done 32 years ago when the street was built. So I have a lot of concerns with that. I mean, I have to say, you know, my street, I was walking my dogs late at night a week ago, and because of the leaves, I fell in a pothole. You know, and so, I mean, that's ridiculous that in this day and age, I should have to worry about things like that. I worry about my more elderly neighbors traversing that right now because of the current conditions. We're lucky that if we call, they usually will fix a pothole for, or the town will fix the pothole. But it's just, you know, as I've said before, it's a stupid pun at this point, but it's unacceptable that we let it get to this point. We continue to add the inventory of unaccepted ways in some manner. We don't find a better way to kind of have the developers have to deal with it in a more timely manner. We're ultimately still putting the burden on residents to have to, I can't imagine getting everybody I would need to get on board, because it's not just my 10 neighbors that are on my street, it's, you know, the 20 surrounding neighbors on the 4 other streets that would have to also get on board with this plan for us to ever have a chance of being an accepted road.
One thing, thank you, Mrs. O'Mahony, but one thing you mentioned that I think has yet to be mentioned, and we ought to, is that the DPW, Jamie and Mike Woods and others, do go out and do the best they can. I know you're fighting an uphill battle to try to patch some of these potholes, but I think we need to mention the fact that you folks do the best you can to try. There's an awful lot of potholes out there to fill. You could probably spend all day, every day doing that. And I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you folks, it's worth mentioning that you folks do try.
Thanks, Mr. Bendel. In Wilmington, we've been doing that for decades. We do a lot more than some other towns do with private ways. We certainly plow them, we patch them. If there was a major sinkhole, we would repair that. What we try to do is get the road to an acceptable passing standard for emergency vehicles, and we're continuing to do that. One thing I would like to point out, and I may have mentioned this at the last meeting, we hear the tax argument quite frequently, and it's a valid argument. However, the fact is, none of your local tax dollars goes towards our road paving program. It's 100% funded right now through the state Chapter 90 program. So tax rate you're paying does help pay for maintenance on other townways, street sweeping, patching, and so on and so forth. But the actual road paving program right now is strictly funded by the state.
And isn't it true, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but isn't it true that the more accepted ways we have, the more money we get from the state?
There is a piece of the pie that I believe it's 60% of the equation goes toward the number of accepted road miles we have in town to get more money.
So I would
It works
assume-
out to be about $8,000 per lane mile that's accepted. So it's
Okay.
not dollar for dollar, but it certainly does help.
Thank you, Jamie. That helps frame this conversation a little bit more, so I appreciate that.
Can I just jump in, Mr. Chairman?
Please, Mr. Kyra.
Does that money, could that money be put towards survey and engineering fees?
Chapter 90 money, unfortunately, not. Chapter 90 money has to be spent on town accepted ways. So we would not be able to use Chapter 90 money on engineering services for roads that are yet to be accepted ways. You can use Chapter 90 money on engineering on town projects, on town roadway engineering, that's correct, but not on unaccepted ways.
You want to jump over here?
Sorry, I don't mean to monopolize this, but I just have one
Please.
more follow-up question
Please
with,
do.
I understand kind of the process that you laid out, but what is the restriction that would not allow residents just to deed the ways as they currently are to the town? Like, why would the residents have to do the engineering, the survey, and the deed prior to the town being involved? Why couldn't they just deed it as is to the town?
The survey plan's required so you know what the boundaries are of what they're actually deeding over. So it creates the deed, the legal description. So the meets and bounds description, you need to do the survey regardless.
Isn't that done when the master plan is done for the subdivision creation?
No, it actually wasn't. That is, I don't have a good example here, but if you look at some of these plans, they're from like 1909, and they're very general dimensions, right? But the lots since then have been consolidated and slightly changed over time. So And certainly the owners have changed too. So like the meets and bounds, so the dimensions have changed along the way of who owns what now. Certainly a discussion is town standards, right? What is this standard? Because the major cost is the improvements of it, is construction costs, when you look at just the breakdown of some of those tables. And what that's certainly if you look at other municipalities, that's where they have kind of lowered the bar, so to speak, for allowing street acceptance to occur.
Mr. Eaton?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Ms. Gingrich and Mr. Looney and Mr. McGaldy for being here. Certainly with 550 constructed roadways and just under half of them being unaccepted, I can appreciate the significance of trying to find a solution that's feasible. I'm looking at your presentation that from when you were here in February as to the different treatment that public ways and unaccepted ways get. Both receive trash pickup, both receive fire and police protection, both receive snow plowing, both get school buses, both get pothole repair for safe passage. The difference is obviously the major repair and reconstruction. I certainly think that kind of flipping the calculus on its head, so where as residents were paying 90% to a plan that has them paying 10% is certainly a move in the right direction. I am curious as to any recommendations as to how to prioritize the existing roads, understanding that for any road to become accepted that is currently not accepted, all of the landowners need to be on board and engaged in the process. But do you have any recommendations as to how to go about targeting specific streets beyond that?
Yeah, I think so. One, I would look at the type of roadway. Does it connect to public ways, for instance? Number of homes served. Any?
If I could interrupt,
Sure.
Paul. This program, which I'm very much in favor of, really mirrors the existing TIP program that we're involved in so many other projects. And what that is, the town would put up the front engineering cost in the TIP program, for instance, the traffic signal at Glen and Middlesex, where the town paid for the engineering, and the state then comes in and looks at this application on a table with dozens of other TIP projects from other communities and decides how to allocate the available construction funding. And we would propose doing that the same way, possibly through the CDTR. So we would assign point values to these different applications. So say in 1 year we got 3 applications come in for 3 different roads where residents are ready to put upfront their engineering costs. And we would look at these from different angles. Paul started to go down this road. Traffic volume is a major one. We would really look at it the same way we prioritize road paving for accepted ways now. Traffic volume is a big one. How many people are on the road, whether it's a dead end or a cut through, whether it sees through traffic. And then there's the whole maintenance and safety aspect of our crews maintaining these roadways. We have roads that we paved in the last 5 years that weren't even on our paving plan because all of a sudden spring comes and the previous winter just destroyed it. That's New England, that's where we live. And Ballardville Street is a great example. We have an extra wide road that sees trailer truck traffic all day long. And when you're sending guys out to patch this roadway, and really can't even do it without a police detail, we're putting our own men in harm's way. So that, to me, would receive a higher priority ranking. So that's just some examples of how we would probably do that. We need to sit down with the rest of our department heads, police, fire, everyone on the CDTR, and to determine a ranking program where we would look at it and say, okay, we realize all 3 of these need to be done, but Road A, it really deserves priority funding in year 1, and then create a 5-year capital plan based on that.
Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you,
McCoy?
Mr. Chairman. I just want to ask Jeff, you're the Chief Fiscal Officer, what do you think of this program?
The plan that's proposed, I think, is a good one. I think understanding that, it's unfortunate for people who live on unaccepted ways that probably most, if not all cases, were not aware when they signed on the dotted line that they were purchasing their home, that what that meant. But the requirement that the homeowners, first of all, get together and collectively make a commitment to pursue this with some measure of skin in the game, so to speak, in terms of, granted, $2,800 is still $2,800, but it's a far cry from, the original proposal that, the original plan that was, that we've been operating under. I think there needs, we need to have the cooperation from the owners of property that abut the road, so that, and that commitment is established by putting up the money for the engineering, the attorney's fees, and the surveying, and then that would allow us to take it to the next step, get the town meeting approval, which then, once town meeting approves it and it becomes a townway, then we can expend public funds. So I'm in agreement with this. This is, we talked again about, or I talked earlier about some of the liabilities that we have. This is one that I haven't even really talked about of late, aside from all the other big ticket items we have. When we start talking about reconstructing roadways, that's yet another cost that really has not been dealt with in a substantive way to date. Jamie talked about the work that is done annually on dealing with our accepted ways. We spend, was it $750,000 or thereabouts a year on dealing with accepted ways, and we've still got a tremendous amount of work to be doing on accepted ways. So when you start talking about bringing unaccepted ways into the picture, that just further adds to the demand on limited resources.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank you for the presentation. This question may be too far in advance, but funding-wise, I know you said you had determining a ranking program. What would you fund from year to year, or how much would you put in this?
Yeah, it's a little too early to determine that. We would have to wait and see what the applications look like and what's on the table in front of us. If a road simply can tolerate a simple mill and fill or an overlay, just pavement, that would really dictate the amount in the capital plan, whereas if a roadway needed complete drainage or wall and reconstruction, the numbers are significantly different.
Would sidewalks be included with all of these new constructed roadways?
Again, that's something we would probably look at from the
One on
CPR
one side,
level.
not on both sides, but maybe just on one side, or?
So when a roadway comes in to be constructed to the planning board, it's often looked at, the context, right? Are there sidewalks leading up to, the new piece that's gonna be constructed? And if so, how does the sidewalk fit into that? You have to look at how much right-of-way you have to work with, so that can you fit a sidewalk? Oftentimes, these older right-of-ways are narrower than our newer ones. So you may not be able to fit a sidewalk. But it's all contextual, so it's what leads up to it, what makes sense, and it's really just kind of a practical approach.
And how about, you mentioned survey, engineering, attorney's fees, would you provide a list of those people, or specialty people for the residents to, or is that something that they have to find and?
We couldn't necessarily make a recommendation, but we can show them previous plans that have come in, examples of plans that have gone before the planning board and been approved.
Yeah. I keep a list in my office of local engineers and surveyors that it's a full list of everyone in the area that I provide to really anyone coming in for seeking guidance on anything from an.
Specialize in this type of.
Exactly.
Work is what I'm saying,
Yeah.
What I'm saying, I don't know if
Right.
engineers, all engineers specialize in all the same things or separately. I'm sure they do separately, so you would want the right person
That's right.
to give you the right information.
Correct.
So that's why I was wondering if you had a list. I understand the conflict of interest that could occur from it, but you want to kind of
guide.
help them get to the right person.
That brings up a point. I don't want to be disingenuous that there could be cases where a survey layout is available for, I was talking like worst case, that really ancient subdivision plans that you described your neighborhood, it sounded like one of those neighborhoods.
Built in 1985.
Oh, it was built in 85?
My
What
neighborhood was
the-
built in 1985.
But the subdivision, the original subdivision, I mean, with all the network of paper streets, it's those types of plans that I don't have good survey on. But there are, one plan came to mind, Ashwood Extension. So Ashwood Extension's private way still, but I have a survey layout plan for that, that if the residents, it's on my short list of kind of those teed up roadways, that if the residents came together and said, you know, we'd like this accepted, and they all signed off, that's already done. So that first consultation with us at CDTR, I'd provide that document, of course, and say, okay, your survey's already completed, and then it would just be the write-up of the deeds from that point.
So would you be notifying residents, like the Ashwood extension, if you already have things like that available to them, so that they know that would be one less thing they'd have to worry about doing?
Ashwood is on my list, yes, to go forward with at next town meeting. So the short answer is yes, these like do-nothing roadways, so to
Right.
speak, of course, yeah.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Thank you so much. If you don't mind sticking around, I know, oh, I'm sorry, Jamie. Yeah,
One more comment.
Sure.
This program, I know it's a tough swallow to hear that we're proposing that the residents still tackle some of the upfront costs. But when you think about it, it really gives them more control over getting their road paved a lot faster. The fact of the matter is, as we said, we get about $750,000 a year in Chapter 90 money, and we have to spread that over about 100 miles of accepted roadway now. The roadways that are kind of getting forgotten about are the currently accepted roads that are at a mid-grade level. And these are people that have already lived on an accepted road for a while, and they've been waiting for the town to pave their road. So this program actually goes one step beyond that. You may have to pay some upfront costs, but it puts you in a whole different program, which kind of streamlines the process and puts you on the fast track to getting your road paved. I mean, the fact of the matter is, some of these unaccepted ways, if they were currently accepted, we still wouldn't prioritize them next year, maybe even the year after, for road paving, if they were accepted now, because they're on a street with maybe 4 other neighbors, a dead end. So they don't really fall into our criteria to prioritize our current Chapter 90 money. As you know, we pave, we try to do a couple of arterials a year, Shawshene Ave being one of them last year. While we're in there, we'll do the side streets. We did Grand Street, Birch Road, Hunt Road this past summer, and we wouldn't have necessarily been in there doing those roads if we weren't right next to it doing Canal Street or Old Shawshene Ave. So I just wanted to say that even though you're paying up front, it does put you on the fast track with a little bit of a ray of hope that they will get paved a lot quicker.
thank you for that.
Can I follow up a question with Jamie? I know that this is just a little bit off track. I would say, when you do repavement of those accepted roads, do you also take care of the sidewalks and repave those?
Yeah.
Is a
Not all the time. We do have in our capital plan, we set aside $30,000 a year for sidewalk maintenance. And we're actually currently in the middle of a project as we speak on Middlesex Ave. So we're trying to redo the sidewalks that give us the best bang for the buck. We did some sidewalk reconstruction on Shawshene Ave by the Shawshene School a few years ago. We did the sidewalks near the Richmond Street Bridge a couple of years ago. This year, we're concentrating on Route 62. So every dollar that we spend on sidewalk repaving is another dollar we're not spending on the roadway. So if the sidewalk is in acceptable
Comes out of the
condition,
same
it's the
pot.
same pot.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
that's what I was wondering.
it's the same pot. So we're annually budgeting about $750,000 in Chapter 90 money. And $20,000 on top of that for crack sealing, which is preventative maintenance, and sidewalk reconstruction as well, $30,000.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Excuse me, we're gonna get to public comment in just a moment, thank you. I wanna, again, thank you, folks, if you don't mind sticking around, I do wanna, if it's okay with my colleagues, take public comment out of order. I think that there, if I had to guess, there's some residents that might want to make a comment, and they've been very patient, so I don't wanna make them wait till the end of the meeting for public comment. But to the three of you, again, thank you. I don't think that there'll be a vote from us tonight. We'll certainly take this under advisement. There's a lot to digest. But this is great information. I think every week, if I had to guess, all of us hear from residents about this concern, so this is great information for us to relay to them. And I know that you guys are always really good about putting this PowerPoint on the website, so we'll make this available to folks that want to access it, or if they want a printed copy, they can contact Town Hall. And certainly, we want to hear from folks about what they think about this. And then perhaps we'd love to have you come back and maybe give you a little more direction. But I know this is not an easy task, so I really appreciate you guys. I've spent a lot of time in your departments looking into this. So if you don't mind sticking around for a little bit more, I'm gonna open it up for some residents. Is that okay? All right. I know folks have been very patient, and if I had to guess, this is why you're here. So certainly, we'll take public comments out of order if there's no objections. And if you just don't mind, if you would mind giving your name and address for the record. Would anyone like to be heard?
Sure, John Bacaludo, 5 Madison Road. First of all, I'd like to say that the Highway Department does a pretty good job paving and patching the road for us on Madison Road, so appreciate that effort too. And Paolo's done a good job talking to me on this issue as well, on the roads. But question, as far as the buy-in from the town on the road, who's gonna approve that piece of it? In other words, if you're in a butter on the road, like 5 Madison Road, where we are, there's town property on there, who would make that $2,500, for example, soft cost initiative?
That's a good question. Do you have a plan for that?
No. We'd have to figure that out, but that would be a part of, it would have to be part of the mix. So what Paul talked about with the report that was done in the 90s, that share of what the town put towards it went up when there was town property. So I would imagine that same idea could apply, that there would be a different contribution if there was town-owned property.
Yeah, so for example, if there's 400 feet of frontage on the street and 400 feet is town property, then obviously the decision would that be 2,500 times 4 would be the contribution from the town to that soft cost. And I guess if there was a simpler process perhaps to get that soft cost like standardized so that residents can just sign off on a form and say, here's the 10 people on the street that approve it, and that's the total amount of the residents, then I think making that process streamlined to get the approval and get that soft costs and the engineering done, et cetera, might make it more efficient. But again, I know there would be a conflict of interest if you were recommending engineers and the attorneys, et cetera, but perhaps if there's some standardized form PDF that says this is the roadmap to get there, then it would make it a little bit more palatable, I think.
Thank you, sir. So if you folks don't mind, I think the gentleman from Madison Road brings up a good question about the town-owned property. If we could look into that, that'd be great. Thank you, sir. Mr. De Palma.
46 Swain Road. Question I have is there any liability to the developers that have built these houses? I understand you're not gonna go back into the 50s and 60s, but in the last 10 years, has there been any bonds issued for, say, you're making a development, you're creating a development, your roads have to be approved. Until they're approved, there's an X amount of dollars that has to be put into a bond to make sure those roads are developed so that they can be approved. And the other thing too is, can we put something in our bylaws that states that any development that's built in the town, the roads have to be approved? Case closed. There'd be no arguments with it or anything else. You're gonna build, you're gonna have approved roads.
Subdivision rules, just for the subdivision rules and regulations, there is, right.
Well, so there are standards that the road has to be built to, and those standards, we make sure that those are acceptable standards, right? So they have to build the road as approved, and the idea of approving a roadway design is that you would, want to accept it, so that it's built in a way that you could accept it as a public way. And there are bonds that require, that we take to make sure that they build it that way. there's a separate piece of it that it changes ownership, right? So that's the acceptance process where the town actually gets a property right from whoever owns it. So an easement or even just the fee, the land. That transfer of the property right, I'm not sure that we could actually force that to happen because it's a transfer of property right. Usually, if a developer is building a subdivision, so the ones that are in construction now, the intent is that that developer wants to have it accepted because they don't want the responsibility of it. They don't want to own it. So it typically, the newer subdivisions that are built, they do get accepted as a public way. But it's a different thing to force that to happen. I don't know.
Yep.
Thank you, Karen. Sir?
Well, I'm Brian, Dartmouth Ave, 7 Dartmouth Ave, like Joe Marie, you think it is. Some of my neighbors aren't gonna be able to afford to come up with the kind of money that we're talking here. Now, I'm assuming, Paul, that along with the street, the more cost, so is it frontage that people are gonna have to pay?
Yeah, so I got a price from some local firms for a survey layout, and they gave me a price per 100 feet of roadway. It's such a moving target, Bob. With, you know, it depends on so many different factors of monuments on the roadway and what they can tie into. And in your case, right off of Lowell Street, you have so many monuments, so much monumentation on Lowell Street that I actually don't think it'd be a very intensive, labor-intensive exercise to lay out that way, Dartmouth Ave.
Right, so, come to Dartmouth Ave. We have a neighbor that, when we recently had a hydraulic oil spill by the trash company on April 10th, and they drove away, and they polluted my street and made my street a hazardous waste site, and my property a hazardous waste, that is still not cleaned 100%. I have all the evidence to prove what hasn't been done and what's been done. A lot of it is just covered over. It's still, when it rains, like I told people before here on this board, it seeps right out of the ground. I have pictures of it yesterday. I blew all the leaves away. You can still see all the oil stain. One person on the end of the street did not want Clean Harbors in their property. Okay, so just picture a hill. My house on the right, his house on the left. Okay, there is still oil coming out of the ground, staining. The water's not receding into the ground where it's supposed to. Right? At the other end of the road, you have a pothole that there's still water there today. When was it rained out? 4 days ago? There's still sections of the road that are still oil stained. There's oil still there. The water's not gonna go. This guy didn't wanna Clean Harbors on his property. He has a carport, you can see it, it's all stained. The oil's still there. The oil went out to the back to the wetlands. I called conservation, nobody cares. Okay. Thanks to Paul and Hive Engineering, I'm no longer living in a river going through my yard. Okay. The engineering, and I helped a little bit of it, I gotta admit, to get the water to go back into the ground. The drainage that they did, the country drainage, it works awesome, okay? It's not 100% because some neighbors didn't want the front of their house to dig up. Well, I was tired of living in the river for 29 years. I've paying taxes. I started out at $875 in 1990, and I'm over $6,000. And Jamie, I think your name is, I'd like to ask you a question. That Chapter 90 funds that you spend, you get that back from the state, don't you? State taxpayers?
It's a reimbursable program.
Correct. All right, so it's not really coming out of our budget. It comes out temporarily until we get it back. Dave Robinson might be able to help me out on this. The statute says that the cities and towns may not use public funds for private roads, correct? It doesn't say they shall not use it. So it's actually up to the cities and towns, I believe, to spend that money, to spend our taxes, because we all pay taxes. If, you know, you say the unacceptable, acceptable. Well, you all accept our taxes, okay? And I have no problem. I signed for the fire station, the high schools. I have no problem paying taxes. But taxation without representation is wrong. okay? And people that live on unaccepted streets aren't getting the full benefit of the taxes they pay, okay? I can't my road is paved, shitty as it is, excuse my French, and that was part of the problem with the hydraulic spill, but people that live on dirt roads, in the summertime, you can't even have your windows open, okay? The dirt's going in their houses and everything, and it's wrong, okay? And you know something, a crappy paved road is better than a dirt road, okay? And I just think, you know something, the amount of money that we spend in taxes, we deserve better than this. We're not second-class citizens. My wife, like Joe Marie, same thing, she's walking the dog down the street, right in the pothole and twisted her ankle. Okay, she's disabled as it is. You know, who cares? Nobody cares, because it's this. It's the not in my backyard syndrome. Not in my backyard unless it's in my backyard. And in my case, it was in my backyard, it went all the way out to the wetlands, all through my yard, I got all the proof in the world, and sorry, but your boss blew me off. Because it's an unaccepted road.
Well,
If
Mr.
it
Bryant,
was if it was a private road, I mean, if it was a public road, everything would have been great. That's all.
thank you for your comments, Mr. Bryant. Just a couple things, if I could. As you know, I've been to your home, and I know we've talked on several occasions. I appreciate your passion on this, and certainly I sympathize with you. But I do take exception with the comment about nobody cares.
Yes, you did care.
Well, I'm not talking about myself. I feel obligated to defend the town on this one. I know that everybody up here cares. These three and their departments are trying. That's why we're here. You've heard tonight, we have members on the board who live on unaccepted ways. Some of us grew up on unaccepted ways. That's why we're here. This is an easy fix. We're trying. Again, we sympathize with you. To say that nobody cares is
Excuse me.
sure.
I can't afford to hire a lawyer to get my street cleaned, okay? When you're thinking about the lot lines or whatever, if you go on Xylo, you see them on Dartmouth Ave. They have them drawn out on Xylo. I don't know where they get them from, if that might help you. But if somebody cared enough, my street would not be like it is right now. It's still contaminated, okay? It's not right, okay? A private company did something to a private road, which isn't really private, it's a public way, whatever. And it's not enough being done. And I can't afford to hire a lawyer to have it done. So, I mean, what do? A GoFundMe page? Maybe we can do that and get all the streets done. Okay, I can't afford it, okay?
One of the other difficult things that we're gonna grapple with here as a community is that we don't wanna pit neighbor against neighbor, right? I mean, we've gotta find a solution that isn't gonna isolate somebody because they choose not to do something. The last thing this board wants is, again, to pit neighbor against neighbor. So I know that you guys are keeping that in mind as we explore this, and certainly we're mindful of that as well. That's the last thing we want. And so,
Can I just say
Sure.
something? That one neighbor doesn't live there. He rents the house. He lives in Amesbury. And when Clean Harbors was asking, can you go on their property, do you mind, cleaning? And he said no. He wouldn't sign the paperwork.
and that's just one example, but again, there'll be other instances, right? I mean, you described early in the presentation that there was a road of four, forgive me, I forget the name, there was 4 homes, and it took you 90 days to get the people to sign off, right? It takes time, and some people are reluctant for whatever reason, and we have to respect that. And that will be a challenge in whatever we decide to do, that there may not be buy-in from everybody, but we have to respect each other's opinions.
One more thing,
Sure.
okay? So my street's still contaminated, okay? Is the town gonna wanna take that street?
Well, just so everybody's, that's a fair question, but just so everybody's clear, Mr. Bryant is describing that the trash company took responsibility for a spill that occurred on your street, hired Clean Harbors to come in and clean it up. The town wasn't as much involved in that as a private company who made a mistake, obviously a large mistake, and has hired a firm. So just want to be clear for the audience at home who might not be familiar like we are with the situation.
Because it was an unaccepted street.
Right.
That's the only
Yeah.
reason why.
And Bob, that's why we're here.
I know, but it's great, it's not getting nothing, now, this happened on April 10th, it happened again on June 20-something. It just happened 3 weeks ago on the trash day on Commonwealth Ave. I have videotapes of the guy pouring 15 gallons back into the truck. And it wasn't even reported, they drove away. I'm on that report too. My wife and I are on the first report. We reported a week later, after it went through my yard with the rain for over a week. The weekend of Easter, I called the town, I called the DPW, I called Clean Harbors to have a boom put in front of my fence. Nobody showed up until Tuesday after, well, by then it was too late. Okay, you know, you have to live it. You know, it's been hell since April 10th for my life. Hurt my business because I had to be on site. Okay? I ain't gonna tell you what did up here for us, okay? It's not right.
Yeah. Again, I don't claim to know what you're going through, I don't. You know, and I sympathize with you, I think we all do. But I know that the manager has been very responsive. You've talked to Mr. Bryant on a number of occasions. I think most of the people at this table. And again, we can't make any promises of when it's gonna happen, but we're trying. These folks are really trying. These guys are really working on it every day. I can tell you that's why we're here. Situations like yours are unacceptable, and that's why we're having this conversation.
Unacceptable, right. And I give the engineers an A+. Okay? But, I mean, can I go after Clean Harbors? No, because I have no backing of the town. Up the end of where John O'Connell's property is, you can see it. Every time it rains, it doesn't go anywhere. That means the oil's still there. I told Clean Harbors when they were cleaning it that it's worse than what they said. I got the pictures. Nobody wants to see the pictures. Nobody wants to see the video. They expected to do a section 150 feet by 12 feet the first day. And then all this other stuff in front of the first day they were expecting to do this. They filled up 3 Clean Harbor dumpsters, okay, with one section. They went down 18 inches across the street from his house where the truck parked and leaked all the oil out, okay? It leaked at every barrel it picked up. Most of it was up in his end. They didn't want to listen to me. They didn't want to listen to me when they were going halfway over the street, and I had to have a little argument with them. And they did see it my way finally, because with these country drainage that Paul suggested, the rain collects there, but it doesn't come flying down the street like it used to through my yard all the time. Yes, there's water going down, it's a pitch, it's gonna. But they work, and that's what I was saying, on these unaccepted streets that you can do country drainage, it works. And that helps keep water out of my cellar that I've been pumping for 29 years, because the water's going elsewhere. You know, and I think if you can do country drainage, it's gonna be less expensive than having to do sewer drainage or whatever. You know, it's gonna save money. You don't have to even put that into the equation as long as you can do it. It can be done on streets like mine. My other issue is, and I don't know who's gonna address this, is the oil went out to the wetlands. It might not show up, but it went there. And it was just, if that was me, seriously, you all know it. If it was me that dumped that stuff in that street, if that was my oil tank in my house, I'd be in some serious trouble.
Again, Bob, I appreciate your commentary, and I know where you're coming from. I really appreciate your passion. I just want to conclude by saying, I think I can speak for everybody, but we do care. The members of this board, the management team, we do care, and you mentioned it, the engineer's doing an A+ job. I don't doubt he'll do an A+ job on this, along with his colleagues, in trying to find a solution. Again, can't guarantee it's gonna happen tomorrow.
What am I supposed to do?
I wish I had the answer. I don't have, I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't have the answer for you, Bob.
You know, and the DPW has to, I got a dumpster there because I had to put a new fence up, and that really screwed up my whole life with this oil spill. But, you know, last year, most of the street went down the end of the road. And I showed Mike that there's a pile this high of gravel and dirt that's gonna have to be done with. The lady's fence is all pushed in, and something's gonna have to be done. Clean Harbors just spread dirt out at the end of the road, which is totally ridiculous. You guys put some of that stone stuff there, right?
First, Mr. Bryan, I'd just like to say, and I agree, the engineering department has done a fantastic job and spent a lot of time and resources on your road specifically. Paul works for the Department of Public Works, so I just want to clear that up right now. So it is the DPW in general that is helping you out and doing the best we can, number one. Number two, it's extremely unfortunate what happened to you. Roadways in general, all over town suffer similar, maybe not to the extent that you suffered, but car accidents happen where oil pans in their entirety spill out all over the road. Construction equipment, hydraulic lines break all the time. It happens. And in your case, Clean Harbors was called, DEP was called, and these organizations trump our response. So once they take over a site like that, we have to let them complete their investigation before the DPW were to get involved in doing anything.
So if this was done on Glen Road, you'd follow it step by step all the way?
I really don't see what the difference is in this case. You have oil spilled on your private property, and that could have happened on an accepted way too.
Right, I know that.
So I don't see what the response would have been. In fact, I don't think the Public Works Department called Clean Harbors or DEP, I
So
believe.
we did.
Exactly.
We did.
So.
I called
you did
DPW,
that,
I called
and that's-
DPW
And that's
first.
fine, I think that's the appropriate response, but again, they have a superseding procedure that they have to go through and complete their investigation. At this point, we can't interfere with that.
Right, so the other day, they were down for the other spill, and I called up and had them come down and show them my street, because it's not clean, okay? And it's mostly near my end of the street, okay? By rights, they should have cleaned half of the street, at least on my side, because I own half the street. And you know what they told me? They told me what somebody else told me in this town, you're getting what you got. And I'm not gonna name the name. Give it up. It's all done. And it's not all done. As long as I'm still alive, it's not all done.
Thank you.
Unless it gets cleaned.
And we hope it does. Sir?
Frank West, 2 Birchwood Road. What I'm wondering is, for these unaccepted roadways that you're asking for a owner contribution, is there any way that the town could have either a revolving fund, so you either like give out some sort of a low interest or no interest loan to do the upfront cost, tax, put it as an assessment on the property, and have it payable over, say, 10 years? So that this way here, people that don't have the, $2,500 or whatever fee you're looking for, maybe they could pay like $250, back to the town over some period of years in some sort of a revolving fund. Kind of like what I think similarly with what happens with the septic systems around in town, but, that meet certain criteria. Just throwing that out there, that might be an idea to help some of the residents, maybe not all of them, but at least help some of the residents in a different way to get the money to do this. And this way here, if it's 8 residents can afford it and 2 can't, and the 10 residents really want the road paved and accepted and all that, could be a way to make that happen. Just throwing that out there.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, I can tell you that all options are on the table. That's why we're here. I know that these departments are gonna explore every option. We're opening to listening to every option, and we appreciate that feedback. Sir?
Hi, John O'Connell, 5 Dartmouth Ave. I'm not gonna rehash what's happened to Bob, so, because you all know it, all right? What I do wanna know, is this. For 2 straight years on Dartmouth Ave, when the plows would come down during the winter, they tore up the street, and in the spring, none of the garbage, none of the debris was taken off or anything like that. I called 2 years in a row, about 3 times, two different times, to have that stuff taken off. You know who took that stuff off? The people we paid to pave and put a new section of road there. Now, I wanna know from this gentleman, when the plows come by and tear up my street, are you gonna come and fix it?
So
Unlike what happened before?
we do have a spring cleanup list, and.
Didn't happen,
well,
2 years in a row.
We try to juggle our maintenance with other construction projects too. We do clean up. But, we, as the DPW, would love to see every unaccepted road get paved, because you know what, when our plows go
I'm not
down.
talking about that, I'm talking
But-
about the cleanup with the plow.
Right, that's what I'm referring to, is if the road were paved freshly, we wouldn't have so much damage of asphalt chunks and whatnot that is getting torn up. It's the patching and the potholes. That pavement goes somewhere when the road is not constructed to standard.
I understand that,
So-
but for 2 straight years, it wasn't picked up.
Yeah.
2 straight years, and I called 2 straight years. And the people who picked it up and took it away were the people we paid $3,500 to make a new road. We paid for it, not the town, we paid for it.
I can tell you, we do maintain a work order system. It's currently up to snuff. I don't have any existing open work orders from the winter as far as picking up asphalt on roadways.
If you
We
make
have
the
to-
mess, you should pick it up.
Well, again, you know, these are unaccepted roads that we're plowing and doing the best we can. We do a lot more than other towns, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't be responsible for what we're doing, but put yourself in our shoes, we're doing the best we can on a road that is really not smooth to plow in the first place.
Yeah,
But
well-
yes, to answer your question, if we move some asphalt chunks and we're told about it, generally speaking, we do clean that up. And if it took you a few years, I apologize for that. Next time that happens, call us. We'll do our best to get the big pieces. We really can't go out there with a rake and a bucket and pick up the smallest pieces of asphalt. We don't treat any road that way.
You didn't need rake a bucket with these. But it's funny, on my tax bill, it doesn't say if my road is accepted or unaccepted. It doesn't say that, you know, so, you know, I just want, you know, I talked to Mr. Hull about it. He was very kind, he was gave me a lot of information, and he's trying his darndest to come up with a solution. I know you guys are trying your darndest to come up with a solution, but you know what? It stinks. It stinks. What happened to him it stinks. And I know you care, and I know everybody, and I do. You're trying to find a solution, but you know what? To let it go this long. Now, this didn't start with you guys. It started in that cesspool called the State House, all right, years ago. And even town managers and town council from years ago knew about this problem. They didn't do nothing about it. And they left you with a big nut to crack. And you know, I hope you succeed. And I appreciate your work, I really do. But you know what, in the meantime, we're stuck. And you know, that's all I have to say. And $2,800 is a lot of dough to come up with, let me tell you.
Mr. O'Connell, thank you. I want to apologize to you that you had a negative experience. We certainly don't want that to
Oh, I got
happen.
a few.
And, but I can assure you that if at any point you or any other resident doesn't feel like they're being heard from a particular department, please reach out to our manager's office, reach out to one of the selectmen. So, you know, unfortunately for me, this is the first time I'm hearing of that incident. You know, feel free to reach out. This is why we're here, and if you're not being heard or you don't think you're being heard with a particular department, let us know and see if we can try to help you out.
Look,
But-
I've been very happy living in this town. There's a lot of things going on in this town that have benefited my family, benefited my children. You know, the 4th of July was one of the big things in our lives. We were very happy in this town, so I have no complaints. But you know what? Stuff it's starting to go a little haywire, and it's just not. And you know, you just want stuff cleaned up. People expect me to clean my property up. I do it, but I do it. But you know, like I said, I don't see on the tax bill unaccepted or accepted street. You know.
I understand your frustration. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much.
No-
I appreciate
Yeah,
letting me
that's,
talk.
no problem. And one thing I want to point out too, that Jamie, you made mention to, is that, you know, I think the DBW is on board wanting to have this done as well. I think a lot of if I had to guess, a lot of your equipment's being damaged by the roads, the conditions of some of these roads, and no one would like it to see more cleaned up than you folks. You don't have to pay, the taxpayers don't have to pay for a new blade, a new truck, new tire, new axle.
It's not just the equipment, it's wear and tear on the body when you're plowing those long hours, but also the cost of maintenance, cost of road patch, and, you know, we seem to be responding to these same roads again and again with road patch, where we could be using them in other areas as well. But we're trying our best to do it. We're always prioritizing the road patching program.
Not an easy task. Bob, I'll come back to you. Just want to make sure to see if anybody else would like to be heard on this particular issue. Seeing none, we yield to Mr.
So-
Bryant.
Problem with that was, it's many years ago, I think 40 residents that were living there. The Curriers are the only ones living there now that actually paid to have the road paved. And that same house at the end of the street, she didn't want to do it. Okay, so the pavement only came to the edge of my driveway. Now, seriously, the best part of that street was in front of my house because I don't have a walkway to my driveway, so I always had to clear the snow away. You know, you got to walk out in the street. So that was the best part of the street, and that's why it wasn't as badly ruined by the hydraulic fluid. But because of the breakup of the street, the breakup of the top, that's why it all seeped. I understand that, okay? And I agree, Jamie, that obviously, you know, a nice street's gonna, you know, right now, I'm blowing the leaves on my street and they're blowing down the street, which they never did before. They always get caught. And it's gonna save on equipment, but it's gonna save the taxpayers money. It's not gonna save, it's gonna save the DPW budget, but it's all the taxpayers. That's why a street like mine was the way it was, part still is, should be a high priority. No matter if it's a short street or a long street. When you have that pavement all broken up and just pushing it down the end of the street, it's not working out. This year was worse. I mean, the guy you had plowing did a great job. He cleaned our street really good, but in doing so, he took a lot of the broken pavement down the street with him. It wasn't cleaned up very well until we had the other stuff.
Yeah.
But that was April 10th too. So of course it didn't get even touched until I think July, which was just beyond me. But they couldn't find anybody to get a bond. Is that what it was? Paul, you couldn't find anybody to pay the street or something? That's why it took so long. I know they were.
Yeah.
Oh, there was like a,
Right.
I wanna say
Who
it was
wanted
like
to touch it?
it was like a 3-month.
Construction season, in this economy, it's really hard to find a paver that would do such a small job. We have that problem now, we have a contractor on bid for our road work, but trying to get him to do a small roadway or a small sidewalk reconstruction project like we're doing on Middlesex Ave, it sometimes takes to the end of the season to get him in.
We can't get them in to do this driveways now. I do think that what Frank West said may help people to just, instead of coming up with $3,000, boom, out of their pocket, like we had to do because we were stuck, because we had Clean Harbors digging up a section of the street. The paving company came in and the owner of the trash company wanted to just go a certain section here and leave out in front of our houses. And the paving guy said, well, if you give me $3,500, we'll do it right now, which was a smart thing to do, and that's what we did, and that's why we had to come up with the money. I don't agree that we should have had to come up with the money because it was a private company that did this to a private. So, but I think if you can spread it out, maybe somebody will say, yeah, if I have to pay $50 a month or whatever, I can do that, as opposed to a lump sum.
Mr. Eaton, you want to chime in?
Yeah, Mr. Bryan stole some of my thunder. I do want to apologize and echo Mr. Bendel for apologizing on behalf of the town for some of the difficulties that you and your neighbors and others that live in unaccepted ways have to go through. But Mr. West's point of possibly setting up a revolving fund is certainly an interesting idea. I know we have one for compost bins and also for subsurface sewage disposal upgrades or septics for folks that might be in a position where the upfront costs might be not aligning with the household budget. So I think if we could, and I know we have some FY '21 planning discussions coming up in the next few meetings, but it might be worth pursuing what options we have available for setting up a revolving fund so that, consistent with Mr. McGaldy's comment, that the hope is that all of these roads end up getting accepted. And I think if we can structure it in a way that helps encourage that to happen and helps folks out so that we can get these roads accepted, I think that meets the goal of the DPW, and it certainly meets the goals for a lot of our residents.
Any other, sir?
I just have one more comment, again, John from Madison Road. At the intersection of Skigliano and Madison Road, which again, the DPW's been responsive to come in and take care of the potholes that I've been calling on over the course of the years, but during the heavy rains, we've had, the fire department, I'm not talking the last couple of years, but maybe 7 years ago, we've had to have them come and pump out the water because it was impassable, probably up to 2 feet of water just in the middle of the roadway there. Now, I'm wondering if there's any consideration, maybe not that the whole street needs to be repaved, but just that intersection between, say, Skigliano and Madison to mitigate future deterioration of the roadway, so that if that section of the street is repaved and leveled, then it would not be a pool of the water drainage area. They've done a good job replacing the drain fixtures that were sagging in a couple of years ago, which was good, but again, the intersection there, I think if there was some attention done there in advance, it might mitigate, again, further parts of the road deteriorating because of the buildup of water ponding there over time.
I guess that begs a good question, Paul, Valerie. Have we had any consideration to a section of road that needed to be addressed opposed to the entire road? It makes a difficult situation even more difficult. But
Kind of speaks to the what I mentioned before about this, like, broad strokes, it's such a case-by-case basis. You'd have, and particularly with residents like the Bryans, and John, and they're on that roadway every day, you know, and Selectman O'Mahony, you know, so there's gonna be, all different types of, prescriptions to, I guess, come up with the right solution for each roadway. It's too difficult to say, but it would be a case-by-case basis.
Certainly something to consider.
Can I just ask a couple questions?
Please.
That I think would be helpful for residents? How would a resident find out, because it's not on our tax bill? Like I said, I moved in December of 2003. I found out I had an unaccepted road in 2007 when we needed to change the zoning in our neighborhood, because we're all non-conforming lots and no one could do additions on their houses. How would a resident find out if their road is accepted or unaccepted? And how would they find out if it is an unaccepted road, kind of where they were rated condition-wise, and kind of that review process that you guys did?
Yep, first question, at the back of the annual report is a list of all accepted ways in town. And if residents can feel free to call my office too, and, you know, we can look that up. We look it up. We also have a data layer on the GIS map too that, well, it's like a color-coded, so, you know, it'll pop up if you zoom into your property, the status of the roadway. As far as this report, I have the report. It's electronic. I can provide it to anyone.
They can call your office and find out?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can give them my email, and we can provide it that way.
Just as a point of clarification, our DPW office does frequently get calls from real estate agents, quite frequently asking if a road is accepted or not. So if nothing else, it's a good public education to always ask your realtor when you're looking at a piece of property, regardless of what town it's in, whether or not the road is a public way.
And just to that point, so because this has been such a systemic issue over the years, within the last, I would say, year or so, after a stretch of calls that I received expressing the same frustration that has been expressed tonight, I contacted the Chamber of Commerce, Nancy Valley, who's the executive director, and suggested to her that she convey to the realtors who may be part of the chamber that while it may not be a legal disclosure, as there are certain disclosures that realtors have to provide to prospective homeowners, that at least it would be a strongly encouraged good business practice if she could convey to her members that when they are talking to prospective buyers, that they should convey whether the property is on an accepted way or not. And she responded that she would pass that along.
Anybody else like to be heard? A representative, I'll go to you first.
Sure. Sorry. Couple things. One, actually, when Bob first reached out to me, I was kind of surprised that, in fact, realtors do not have to disclose it. So we're actually kind of looking now to codify, and that disclosure would be required. In this case, private roads are kind of abused. We tend to think of them as kind of like an Avalon development, which leads me to my first question. All of the different towns, there's 3 of these in Massachusetts who have really kind of tackled this before. It makes a relative comparative case study, at least in my research. Nantucket, Franklin, and Dedham. All 3 of them disqualified streets, which 100% of the abutters are a part of a homeowners association. Because these tend to be condo developments where it's kind of commonly understood upon the purchase of the property, you're also inheriting the parking and the road and the speed bumps and the odd signage. Like, it's very clear that this is a public, or excuse me, a private way. Will Wilmington also be, for example, telling Avalon Drive, well, this is still within the confines of the Avalon companies, maintenance and what have you?
Yeah, in that case, you know, the Avalon properties aren't laid out within a right-of-way. That's
Sure.
basically on a large parcel of land with a roadway that looks like a road, but
Right.
it's within a larger parcel. So that's kind of the difference. You know, we have unaccepted roadways that are laid out in a right-of-way that's open to public travel.
Okay, but, so those are
So it's
disqualified.
remain private, filed privately, maintained privately, disqualified.
Okay. And then in some conversations with my colleague Representative Roy, who covers Franklin, they did mention something like Mr. West had in order to help. But if I could just give a word of advice, he asked me to convey sometimes there's a bit of a tragedy of the commons there, where if you establish a fund, of course everyone goes for it because they view it kind of as free money. So there will have to have a discussion there on things like, I believe you should have a preference for the elderly, retired, fixed income, and then low income, et cetera, et cetera. But I do like that idea overall because when I started asking some of my colleagues about how their towns addressing that, there is that issue of Chapter 90 improvements on private ways. Because at the end of the day, even though it wasn't disclosed, it's expressively prohibited beyond light repairs and snow removal for state funding in order to kind of help improve along that. So I also do want to mention though, and it's an answer I haven't been able to find, maybe you saw it through yours, Dedham did offer 100% of the cost to be comped by the town. Again, though, word of caution, it went from about a 6 to 8 year expectation for then out to 10 to 12 because they were picking up the additional cost, and obviously each year's budget became less effective with that.
Yeah, I did. I researched a lot of municipalities. I found Dedham, they were in a very similar situation as Wilmington is as far as just the vast number of unaccepted ways they had. What they have in Dedham is about a 2.5-year process, and it's up to the selectmen to assign a betterments to go through the street acceptance process or not, with the expectation that more often than not, they wouldn't assign a betterment. So it's a, and then there's, that's just to get the roadway accepted. Once the roadway is accepted, it just goes into the general paving program. So it could be, from my discussions with their town engineer, it could be 10 years, 20 years, it's just.
Just one last question. As far as the bond rating of the town, what's the expectation of if the roads continue to get improved and they become paved, more of the private roads get accepted? Is there any expectation of the bond rating increasing for the town here and the potential savings on interest loans?
Yeah, I don't expect that this will have any kind of a effect on our bond rating. Certainly not anything that you could really directly measure. Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, just real quick, and it's probably directed to the representative, maybe you could help us out here, but I've been on the board a long time, and we've sent several letters over the period of 30 years. I'm former town manager Kyra, and I remember directing the town manager Howell to send a letter to our legislative delegations, you know, that the state really needs to assume more of a responsibility here, because it's unacceptable when we have, 40 to 50% unaccepted ways in the community. Once again, there are 351 cities and towns in this Commonwealth, and I'm sure representatives hear it all the time, but with all due respect, and I know you're newly elected, but it's gone on deaf ears. It's gone on deaf ears. The state really needs to get it together and come up with something in their budget to help reimburse the towns or come up with a formula to try to help us. I mean, that's what we're looking at. So we're gonna really, if I can finish, please. I'm looking for your help. I wanna work with you. And I would hope to think that maybe you talk to your colleagues and say, hey, there is a serious problem. You acknowledge that. And you were just newly elected. I wanna see you do well. I really mean that. But the state needs to take a better proactive role in this to help cities and towns. I mean, it's 50% of the unaccepted ways, that's unacceptable. But we also need funding from the state because we pay a lot of state taxes too.
I don't disagree. That's why they came up with specifically the subdivision. I think it's chapter 84, subsection 81 or so, is that the local substation control for private development. But it's
Avalon. You know, we're talking about unaccepted ways in the
I
town.
understand.
Forget about Avalon.
Correct.
They're married to that forever and ever.
Correct.
Everybody is.
But that's ultimately comes down to the local zoning and the control. This is private property to be developed, and it's for the towns to balance that. Our challenge is now that the understanding is, back in the day, it was a private road, it was built, it was accepted by the town immediately at that time. And sure, like I said, Nantucket, Dedham, and Franklin are the 3 other major comparative cases I've seen across the Commonwealth. Even Tewksbury has some, but it's not really to the degree. And again, I mean, the challenge is that that's a request for public money. Whether folks are not new, they're purchasing private property, now we're using this to directly, basically, essentially subsidize the developer from the 70s and the 80s. So it comes down to request, is that the moral, the righteous thing to do? In this case in Wilmington, I think it is, but it's also a precedent we don't want to have to set across the Commonwealth where anyone can just build a road, walk away from it if the initial buyers agree to it, and expect some sort of public reimbursement later. That's the challenge I'm facing there.
You're talking about Avalon, places like that.
No, I'm talking about everything, sir.
I mean, just doing the math, you know, if it's $8,000 per mile and we have a marathon amount of mileage here, that's $210,000 additional dollars we'd be getting through Chapter 90 funding if we manage to address this issue. So I think, you know, I understand we want all the help we can get, but I feel like we have to help ourselves a little bit here, and I think that's what your plan starts to do. So I know, you know, I've probably been coming at you harshly just because it does hit close to home for me, obviously. We need to do something. I think I can say that with 100% confidence that we can't continue to do nothing because the balance is just gonna continue to go off kilter the way it has been. But my concern is, you know, we're still putting some of the burden on residents, and there's got to be a way that we can alleviate that further. That it shouldn't be, you know, that a lot of us didn't know what we were buying, whether it's because we had a real estate agent who wasn't telling us, or we just didn't have the information. You know, I can 100% say it was my first home I ever bought. I had no idea that I was on a non-conforming lot and my zoning was screwed up. I had no idea that I bought a 3-bedroom house septic system with a 4-bedroom house, that I paid taxes on a 4-bedroom house. I had no idea it was an unaccepted road until I started learning more and more about it. And thank God I love my house. I love living in Wilmington, but, you know, we can't expect everybody to know everything when it comes to these situations. And I just hope that we can come up with a plan that starts chiseling away at this at the very least, if not address it more significantly, because it seems like there's only benefits to getting it done, to get more money to kind of hopefully not allow it to continue happening in some manner, to strongly encourage the developers to go to 100% and not just get it so that it's acceptable, but then kind of walk away and hope that it gets done. So I appreciate what you've done. I just feel like we need to make sure the ball's actually rolling on this and not just a lot of talk and not enough action.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Mr. West?
Sorry, I know it's a long night. 2 quick comments. One, if you were to try to do a revolving fund type process, and that would be a town meeting vote in now May. So it's something that if it's something that could be done, you know, to get on the May agenda, that would, you know, May town meeting, if possible, that would be great. The other comment is that maybe both the Board of Selectmen and through our legislative delegation could contact the Mass Municipal Association, of which you guys are a part of, have the Mass Municipal Association write a letter to the Greater Boston Board of Realtors to say, can you add on your listing sheets, being a realtor, we fill out listing sheets, you know, whether the property is the property that you're listing is on an accepted way or not. This way here, that kind of alleviates, that way, you know, when you know, Ms. Mahoney or somebody Mahoney, excuse me, or somebody sees a listing sheet, they know right away, is it an accepted way or not accepted way? And that might make or break their decision to buy that particular property. But just a thought that if it's on the listing sheet, and again, maybe not all realtors will fill it in properly, I don't know, but again, just a way to help the consumer. And that, I think the best way would be not for the Wilmington Selectmen to write them, or certainly you can, but I think the Mass Municipal Association, because this affects, you know, basically the whole Commonwealth. So at least, you know, that's, you know, just a thought pattern, maybe the legislative delegation, you know, maybe you guys could do something along that line as well.
I already begun drafting a piece of legislation asking for realtors to disclose this along with their other required things. It's a matter of.
Thank you for that. Would anybody else like to be heard? Okay, seeing none, we want to thank the 3 of you for your presentation. I know this is not easy work, and certainly to the residents, we hear you that it's frustrating. We wish we had a better answer in the short term. What I can tell you is we're trying to address this, and we want to make sure we get it right for everybody. I understand that it's been frustrating for folks for a very long time, and I think I can speak for everybody up here that we are sympathetic to you, and we want to make sure we do this and we do it right. So we look forward to hearing more from you folks. We need some time to digest this, talk to residents. I thought some great questions were raised here tonight that I know you guys will take back and work on, and hopefully we'll hear from you again. And I also want to plug you, the three of yous and your departments as well. Every time I know I've reached out to you guys have been very receptive, and I appreciate that. And I know that you're willing to take calls from residents as well. So I thank you for continuing to do that and lending your expertise. Every time you guys come here, I continue to be impressed by the three of you. So I really appreciate your work. Again, Paul referenced the document. 1994 to 97 was the last time that we've kind of really addressed this. Twice already this year, you've been in front of us to try to address this issue. So I know it's taking longer than we would all like, but we are working. It is a priority to try to find some solutions for residents, and we appreciate everybody's patience.
Thank you very much.
One more thing, I was here for the 90s.
You weren't.
We were at the Woburn Street School, me and Mr. Eaton and Paul. Thank you for being here. Okay, we will jump back into communications. I believe we have one more to go, or two.
We have a couple. So the next item is information regarding the applications for affordable homeownership opportunities at Spruce Farm. You'll recall this is the property off of Andover Street. There are three condominiums as part of the requirement for affordable units there that will be subject to a so-called auction. Two of them are actually prioritized for local preference. Just noting from the information that's been publicized here, there will be an information session on December 11th and a lottery on January 16th of next year. And the location is going to be here at the Wilmington Town Hall, 6:30 p.m. There's information that's been posted online and various other venues in terms of the specifics. I would just note that the property, these condominiums would be for sale for $251,800. And there's also information about household asset limits and other qualifying information. Certainly, if anyone has any questions, they can contact Kristen Costa Associates, either at 978-758-0197 or online at Chris Costa at laasoc.com. And the applications can be downloaded at www.laassoc.com. Also, any questions, you can contact the planning office here at the Town Hall, 978-658-8238.
And can we post that at the senior center as well?
Yes, if it hasn't already been posted there.
Great, thank you.
Next is correspondence from Don Bronson, Chief Operating Officer from Monogram Food Solutions. They're up on Ballardvale Street. And it's notice of intent to apply for a Massachusetts Economic Development Program in Wilmington. This is the same program that Analog pursued a couple of years ago. They're apparently looking to do some expansion. They're talking about investing $18.5 million in real property and another $2.5 million in personal property, and noting that they are looking to add 35 new jobs to the area. So this is in the early stages. I've not heard from them directly. It's my understanding that they are working with a representative from the state's Economic Development Office, and I'm expecting to be in touch with them to get more specifics.
Okay. We'll move into board to consider items.
First, under Board to Consider is correspondence from Tina Stewart, the library director, and this is with regard to naming of the outside seating area in memory of Peggy Kane. I'll just read her letter into the record. Peggy Kane, who was a member of the Friends of the Library since 1998 and served as president from 2009 to 2018, passed away on May 22nd, 2019. In addition, she served on the Board of Library Trustees from 2001 to 2004. She also volunteered at the bookstore next door and at many library events. Ms. Kane was on the Wilmington School Committee for 18 years and served as chairperson from 2007 to 2016. In recognition of her volunteerism and her passionate belief in the importance of education and reading, the Board of Library Trustees voted at its June 2019 meeting to recommend to the Board of Selectmen that the library's new outside seating area be named the Peggy Kane Reading Garden in her memory. Thank you for your consideration in this matter. So the request basically is that the board consider at the as articles are being prepared for the upcoming annual town meeting, preparation of an article that would name the seating area in Peggy Kane's honor.
Okay, wonderful woman. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I'll
Commis-
second it.
Motion's been made and second. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, so we will have an article prepared for town meeting. Next, under Board to Consider is the 4th of July request for use of the town common and Swain parking lot for the annual tree lighting. This correspondence comes from Scott Grant, who chairs the committee, and he notes the July 4th committee requests that the Board of Selectmen grant the committee permission to utilize the town common, including the parking lot next to the 4th of July building, for the annual tree lighting to be held on Saturday, December 7, 2019. The festivities will commence at 4 p.m. and will continue until 7 p.m. He goes on to note some of the special features, including Santa's arrival at 6 p.m. As in past plans, the events include horse-drawn hay rides, kiddie rides presented by Cushing Amusement, and a host of other activities that evening. The committee wishes to extend its appreciation to the board and the town manager and his staff for supporting this event. In addition, the evening would not be possible without the efforts of the Wilmington Department of Public Works, Public Buildings Department, Police Department, and Fire Department. The committee members are very grateful for the contribution of department heads and staff members of each.
Okay, would anybody like to make a motion to allow the use of the town common for the annual tree lighting?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you very much. The motion's made. Is there a second?
Second.
And second, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? It is unanimous. And we look forward to it. It's always a great time.
The next item is an email from Jennifer Bolanos. She's requesting, reaching out on behalf of We're One Wilmington. As you know, our annual Festival of Trees is scheduled for the first weekend in December. We would like to request permission to place yard signs on the town common the week leading up to the event. They will be immediately removed at the end of the weekend. This has been a past practice that has been authorized.
Would anybody like to make a motion for the We're One Wilmington group to place signs on the common?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Kyra. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. McCoy. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
I'm going to abstain since I'm the president of that group.
Okay, we have 4 in favor, 1's going to abstain. Motion passes. Thanks to the WOW group.
Next and final under board to consider is the approval of the contract with the New England Police Benevolent Association, Local 101. This is the dispatch Dispatchers Union. And this is a 3-year contract that would start 7/1/2019 and run through 6/30/2022. Over the course of the 3 years, there would be a cost of living increase, 2.5% the first year, 2.75 second year, and 2.75 the third year. There would also be longevity language added to the contract. This group did have longevity, as do the other contracts, for a period of time, and then it was for a stretch not in the contract. This would restore longevity, but at lower rates than previously, $500 for every 5 years of service. Also, it would increase their night shift differentials for those individuals working 3 p.m. To 11 p.m. and then again 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It would constitute a 25-cent per hour increase in their hourly rate as of the signing of this contract, and then again as of 7/1/2020. Also, there's currently in the language in the contract an EMT stipend for those individuals who are dispatchers and have their EMT certification. The current amount is $350. It would go up to $500 with this contract. And then also the holidays. As with the police and fire, dispatchers oftentimes are working holidays. Currently, they receive 11 additional paid days for those holidays. The new contract would allow them to use up to 5 days of that time for vacation, as opposed to being paid a separate amount for those holidays. And then one of the counters, if you will, the ability to carry forward vacation time would be capped at 5 days. One of the things that's been a theme for me going forward with these contracts has been trying to address the long-term liability of accruals on paid leave. So this caps vacation at not more than 5 days carried forward. So days that are not used essentially would be forfeited. Current language requires the town to pay for broken glasses. Someone wears glasses. If they're broken on the job, the town has to pay for them. The new language would restrict that to certain circumstances. Sometimes dispatchers will be called to assist the police in intake of prisoners, and so this allowance would only be for those dispatchers that might serve in that capacity on a limited basis. And then finally, personal days, which is another accrual that has happened in the past. Individuals would no longer be able to accrue personal time. They get 3 days a year. It basically is use it or lose it. Finally, there's the new contract will require that dispatchers wear a prescribed uniform, and this will be developed through a policy that will be worked on in conjunction with the union and management. So those are the high points of the contract, and I would request that the board authorize the contract.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the agreement between the town and the Local 101 Dispatchers Union from July 2019 to June 30th, 2022?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. The motion's been made by Mrs. O'Mahony. Is there a second?
Second, then.
Motion's made and seconded by Mr. Eaton. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? It's unanimous.
And I would just ask that after the conclusion of the meeting, that the board, as has been the practice, sign the contracts in my office.
Okay. We did take up public comment, but I see some folks are still here. Give the opportunity, anybody else would like to speak? Anyone else, anybody new? Okay. Mr. West?
Real quick, on behalf of Boy Scout Troop 136, we recently had a fundraiser where we worked in conjunction with iPods for Vets, and had an event at the Mason Hall this past Saturday where we had the various residents come in, and just to let you guys know that we had the residents signed about 400 to 500 Christmas cards that are gonna go to iPods for vets and be distributed to local vets hospitals. In addition, we had about 9 bags of assorted toiletries, clothes, things like that come in. And after the event was over, somebody else came in with roughly $150 worth of toiletries in addition to everything that we had raised thus far. So what we want to do is that for up until a couple of weeks before Christmas, what we'd like to do is our troop and pack meet at the Mason Hall on Thursdays, basically from 6 to 8:30. So if anyone wants to donate anything further that would go to iPods for vets and be distributed to veterans for the holidays, we'd graciously accept them. And I wanted to personally thank both yourself, Chairman Bendel, and also Selectman Kyra for attending the event. And looks like I hope you had a good time, and I certainly think it was a worthy cause, and it was kind of neat, you know, with our speakers that we had. So I wanted to acknowledge both of your presence and thank you, and actually all of you for attending on Veterans Day too. I think it's important to the community and to the veterans to see the support of the town, which obviously we always have. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. West. Very worthy cause, so thank you and your troop for putting it on. Anyone else like to be heard? Okay, we'll move to announcements. And I would be remiss if I didn't just start by saying we want to especially thank Lou, Mike, and Terry from our Veteran Service Office for putting on what was yet another wonderful memorial on Veterans Day to honor our veterans. And it was extremely well attended. Some commented it was one of the largest crowds we've had in a very long time, despite the cold weather. And that doesn't surprise me one bit, because Wilmington is a very patriotic community, really values the service and sacrifice of our veterans. So special thanks to the 3 of them from the office for organizing, but an even more greater thank you to all of our veterans out there. That's all I have for announcements. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Mr. Kyra?
I'll start. I echo your comments, and also it was quite moving to have the Vietnam veterans come up and place the wreath in front of the monument. So certainly, thank you to Lou and Mike and Patty for what they've done on behalf of the veterans in Wilmington. I also had the opportunity to attend the Methodist Church Veterans Breakfast with my son, who was in the Army, and it was quite a moving event as well there. I want to thank the Methodist Church for putting on Veterans Breakfast on, I believe it was Saturday. And that same day, we attended as Mr. West mentioned, the chairman and I attended at the Friendship Hall, the Boy Scouts fundraiser, 136. And the one thing that I stayed for that presentation from John Katsaros, who's a Haverhill resident. He's a World War II veteran. He's 96 years old. He put on a PowerPoint. I wouldn't even know how to do a PowerPoint. And it was amazing. He has a book called Code Burgundy, The Long Escape. He was 20 years old when he was shot down. He was flying in a B-17 bomber, and he made his way with help from the French resistance. It was just amazing to hear this gentleman's story. So thank you for bringing him to Wilmington on that.
Mr. Kyra? Anyone else have an announcement?
Just real quick, I wanted to say I was able to attend the State House event. I know Rep. Robertson had to leave, but in memory of Representative Maselli for veterans with the iPods for wounded veterans, and that was wonderful, a wonderful day to kind of kick off this month in honoring our veterans. I wanted to thank the Knights of Columbus. On Sunday, I learned that they cook breakfast for the widows and widowers of veterans. I want to apologize if any of them had a bad breakfast, because I guess my husband was one of the cooks, and he doesn't know how to cook, I can say, after 18 years of marriage. As the wife of a veteran, the daughter of a veteran, and the daughter-in-law of a veteran, I have to say thank you to the families of the veterans, because they also make such a sacrifice to support the veterans. But in November, tonight we talked about the tree lighting and the Festival of Trees, and we're coming up on the holidays. So kind of my challenge to you guys for November is to really practice gratitude. I'd love to see social media fill up with more gratitude instead of what we normally see. So shameless plug, we're One Wilmington's Facebook page posts something every day. That is what we're thankful for this month, and I'd love to see other people do it as well. So that's it.
Thank you very much. And with that, move to new business. Does anybody have any new business they'd like to bring up? Okay.
I would like,
Sure.
just to maybe, if the town manager, not tonight, obviously, but could you provide us at our next meeting, or one in December, some update on the Munis system?
Sure.
To see where we're at. I know we appropriated $1 million to get a new program in to the town. Just I want to see how far advanced is that already taken place? Has it been implemented? I haven't heard.
Yeah, it's a work in progress, but I will update the board.
Okay, thank you.
Any other new business from any board members? Okay. We'll move to our final portion, important dates, please.
Important dates, through December 6th, curbside collection of yard waste. Drop-off is happening on November 13th, Old Main Street, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Again on the 16th, Old Main Street, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then on the 20th, Old Main Street, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. November 20th is the next Economic Development Committee meeting, Town Hall, Room 9, 7 p.m. November 21st, Elderly Services Commission, Bazell Senior Center, 1:30 p.m. November 23rd, Shawshene Tech Craft Fair, 100 Cook Street, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. That's in Billerica. Also, November 23rd, at brush drop-off, Old Main Street, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. November 25th is the next Board of Selectmen's meeting here, Room 9, 7 p.m. As part of that meeting, a discussion of the local property tax policy in reference to classification for fiscal 2020 at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, Room 9, 7 p.m. Another drop-off on November 27th, Old Main Street, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Thanksgiving is on the 28th of November. Town offices closed. Offices closed also on the 29th of November. And then a brush drop-off on November 30th, Old Main Street, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. And the next Ice Rink and Recreation Facility Committee is December 4th, Town Hall, 7 p.m.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Made and seconded. All in favor? It's unanimous. Good night, everyone. Thank you for being here.